I want you to think about worry, not necessarily the feeling of being anxious, but what's really behind it. And that's the constant need to know what's going to happen. And for a lot of people, it's not a specific fear that's the problem, it's the uncertainty, the not knowing. And when we can't tolerate uncertainty, worry often becomes a go to strategy. We try to predict what's going to happen, we try to prevent, and we prepare for every possible bad outcome. But that comes at a cost of really high anxiety. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about a practical way of changing how you can relate to uncertainty as a way of reducing your overall level of worry. Now, in previous videos, I've talked a lot about what intolerance of uncertainty is, how it works, and how it tends to play a big role in maintaining worry. I've talked about the different ways intolerance of uncertainty can show up in someone's life, the various forms, the various manifestations it can take, both in terms of thought patterns and how people behave. Intolerance of uncertainty can take different forms, things like over researching, seeking constant reassurance from other people, procrastinating, avoiding decisions, or trying to plan and control every possible outcome. These are all behaviors driven by the discomfort and the intolerance of uncertainty, the intolerance of not knowing. So, when it comes to managing worry, the idea isn't to get better at avoiding or escaping or eliminating uncertainty in your life. It's about getting better at being more tolerant of uncertainty. And the key to this lies in recognizing what worry really is. Worry isn't just aimless or abstract thought. It's a kind of mental effort, a mental attempt to prepare for or to prevent bad outcomes. When we worry, we're essentially making predictions about what might go wrong. So, what we want to do is to learn how to relate to those worry predictions in a new way. Instead of automatically believing our worries as facts, we want to start thinking about them like hypotheses, like you do in science. And a hypothesis, all it is an educated guess. It's a possibility, not a certainty. So when you're worrying, what you want to do is to try to frame it in a way like this. This is something I think might happen, but I don't know for sure. That shift from seeing worry not as a fact, but as a prediction, that's the first step in building and becoming more tolerant for uncertainty. And once you can see worries for what they are, just predictions, the next step is putting those predictions to the test through behavior. And that's where behavioral exposure to uncertainty comes in. And what this means is intentionally doing things that you're uncertain about so that you can learn from your experiences with that uncertainty. I often refer to these as tolerating uncertainty experiments. And the idea behind tolerating uncertainty experiments is simple. You recognize or identify something that you're avoiding or worrying about because of uncertainty, and you intentionally do that thing anyway. And you gather real world evidence about what actually happens when you allow uncertainty rather than trying to eliminate or avoid it. So let's talk about an example. Let's say I've been avoiding returning a phone call from a friend because I'm worried that that friend might be angry with me. So, my tolerating uncertainty experiment would be something like going ahead and returning the phone call. That's the behavior, that's the action I'm going to take. Before I do that, I want to clarify what exactly my worry is predicting will happen. What is the specific outcome that I'm afraid will happen if I make that phone call to my friend? And this is where we get into the structure of the tolerating uncertainty experiment. And what I often give my clients is a worksheet that helps guide this process. It breaks the experiment down into steps so that it's easier to approach and to reflect on. And I'll link to a version of the worksheet below so you can download it and try it for yourself. And this worksheet has four main parts to it. The first two you complete before doing the experiment. So the first step is identifying the behavior you're going to do, your experiment. In this case, that would be returning the phone call to my friend. And the second step is writing down what your worry is predicting will happen. What exactly are you afraid will happen? So, for example, my friend will be upset and yell at me. And this is where worry awareness training becomes really important. And we talked about worry awareness training much earlier in this series. Before you can really start to challenge your worry, you need to know what your worry is. You need to bring that worry into clearer focus. And that's what this step does. It forces you to spell out the feared outcome so that it can now be tested. So now I've got my experiment. I've got my hypothesis, my worry prediction. The next thing I do is go ahead with the behavior. I make that phone call to my friend. This is the actual exposure, and it's also the data collection phase of the experiment. So, what I do is I pay attention to what happens and I write that down in the third part of the worksheet. Maybe I call my friend and they're actually really glad to hear from me. They were surprised I hadn't called back sooner and they had some really exciting news that they wanted to share. So, it turned out a lot better than I expected. Or maybe I call my friend and they've just lost their job and they were reaching out for emotional support or advice. It's not what I feared, but it's a difficult conversation to have. Or maybe the worst happens. I call my friend and they're genuinely upset with me. They tell me that they've been hurt and I've been unresponsive and distant, and they're really disappointed with that. Whatever the outcome is, I record that and write down what happened. And see, the point of the experiment isn't to guarantee a good outcome, it's to get real feedback from your experiences with uncertainty. And this is how we learn how we should actually feel about uncertainty. So once I've done all of that, I then move on to the final part of the worksheet, the fourth section, which is drawing a conclusion. I look at what happened and I ask, was my worry accurate? Did the predicted outcome actually come true? Did it happen the way my worry told me it would happen? So imagine doing this kind of experiment not just once, but 100 times. And if 95 of those 100 experiments turn out badly, meaning that my worst fears are confirmed, what would that tell me? Well, I'd probably come to the conclusion that uncertainty is genuinely dangerous, that when you're unsure about something, it usually does go wrong. So it would make sense to try even harder to avoid uncertainty in the future. What if it's the other way around? What if 95 of those 100 experiments turns out fine? Either nothing bad happens or the outcome is actually something positive. What does that tell you about uncertainty? Well, it tells you that most of the time, uncertainty isn't something to be afraid of. It's just a part of life. And when you start to see that, your relationship with uncertainty begins to shift. You stop assuming that not knowing equals danger, and you start to realize that the unknown includes neutral and even good outcomes, not just the bad ones. And that's the real goal here. It's not to convince yourself with logic that uncertainty is safe. It's not about positive thinking. It's about experiencing uncertainty directly and learning from those experiences. And when you engage in these tolerating uncertainty experiments, you give yourself real life, real world examples that challenge the assumption that uncertainty is inherently dangerous. And the more you do this, the more you observe that your worries don't actually come true, the more you'll start to doubt the reliability of these worry predictions. And over time, those will start to carry less and less weight. They'll feel much less compelling or true. It's kind of like a weather forecast that's always wrong. If the weatherman says it's going to rain and it's always sunny, and then the weatherman says it's going to be sunny, but it always rains, you'll probably stop taking that weatherman's forecast seriously. And you'll probably stop bringing an umbrella just because the weatherman said it's going to rain. And that's all really what worry is. It's a forecast. It's a prediction. And if your predictions are constantly wrong, you learn to stop relying on them so much. Learning to tolerate uncertainty doesn't mean that you have to like it. It means that you stop letting it control you. And through repeated, intentional experiences with uncertainty, you can start to see that most of the things you fear don't actually happen. And even if they do, you learn that you can often handle them. And over time, your brain starts to treat uncertainty less as danger, but more as just something that's a part of life. These experiences aren't about being fearless, they're about being open and seeing what happens when you directly face uncertainty. And so that's what I'd encourage you to do to build tolerance for uncertainty. It's to think about some tolerating uncertainty experiments and to actually try them out. Download the worksheet below, fill it out, do an experiment, and see how it goes. And if you're interested in learning more about other ways to build tolerance for uncertainty, I'll be talking about that more in the next video in this series, and you'll be able to find it here once it's been posted. So that's all for today's video. As always, thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one.